The editorial this week is titled "Time is Running Out." And in there we point out the fact that many have left the church over the years for whatever reasons, for no reasons, and that there is going to be a falling away to come still, where more and more people will leave. And the point was made that this is actually a very tragical situation because we are nearing more and more the time of Christ's return. We are seeing prophetic events taking place and being fulfilled with a speed which was unheard of maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. So in the editorial, we make the following statements. Ever since President Trump came to power, the relationship between Europe and the United States, which was never that great to begin with, has deteriorated in unique and unparalleled ways, which will ultimately lead to a nuclear war between these two power blocs. It has been prophesied, we say. It has to happen, it will happen. But we also continue, after President Trump came to power, the relationship between the United States and Israel, which was not that friendly under President Obama, improved tremendously, and more demands are made for the building of the Third Temple, which some time back would have been unthinkable. Many ascribe a providential role to President Trump, comparing him to King Cyrus, who helped the Jews to build the Second Temple. And then we put the following in parentheses. We believe this too. And so we know that President Trump is not going to be forced out of office through impeachment, but rather that he will be re-elected in 2020, as he will have to stay in power to fulfill his role of what has been biblically prophesied, close parenthesis. I'd like to add the following right here. I watched a little bit yesterday on that impeachment circus, which is going on. And I don't know whether Adam Schiff, who is running this, wants to be compared with the greatest showman on earth. You probably have known this movie with Hugh Jackman. Well, he most certainly is a showman, but he is not coming anywhere close to being the greatest one. His performance was just extremely offensive to me. I mean, I don't know how you felt about it. The whole thing is a farce, a sham. It's a complete total circus. But what it will do, because there's no evidence, nothing presented whatsoever so far the entire week, which would remotely justify impeachment, and even though the House might do it, there's no way that the Senate will. What it will do is that the re-election of President Trump, even from a human standpoint, is now virtually assured. This is going to backfire so badly on the Democrats, and even many Democrats feel that way already when they look at this complete total circus. But we go on in the editorial to say, but when the Third Temple is being built and animal sacrifices are being brought again on the Temple Mount, Europe will intervene militarily with a described and declared goal of bringing peace to the region, which will be rocked by turmoil, terrorist attacks, local wars, and terrible aggression among Jews and Arabs. Because we know, don't we, that once the Third Temple is being built, once the animal sacrifices are being given, the Great Tribulation will start. And the Great Tribulation will be a war to begin with between the United States of America and the united power bloc of Europe, but also between the united power bloc of Europe and the UK, or what's left of the UK by that time, and certainly Great Britain. Breaking Israel News published the following interesting article on November 11, which we are quoting in our update. After much deliberation, the Sanhedrin has issued a declaration calling on Iran to return to their biblically correct identity as the Persian Empire. If they do not, another, possibly President Trump, will take the role of the anointed king, designated to lead the effort to build the temple. The Sanhedrin stated, quote, Iran's actions are in stark contrast to the great King Cyrus of Persia, who ended 70 years of exile that began with the destruction of the first temple. King Cyrus commanded the Jews exiled in Babylonia to return to Eretz Yisrael and rebuild the temple. King Cyrus aided in the restoration of the temple by providing the tools to restore the temple and begin the temple service. Cyrus is the anointed king that is mentioned in the prophecies of Isaiah 150 years before his reign. Then Rabbi Hillel Weiss, the spokesman of the Sanhedrin, is quoted as saying, "The role of Cyrus as the anointed king was for a specific role. There needs to be a central figure. In his time, it was Cyrus." Rabbi Weiss said, noting that the Sanhedrin had compared President Trump to the Persian king. This could be Trump, but he also stands at a crossroads, they say, because they are not totally sure, but they think it's going to be he. And the same publication, Breaking Israel News, wrote on November 13, at a super donor event, being blessed by Jews as a king, Trump suggested that he may take on a new role, Prime Minister of Israel. Of course, he was kidding somewhat, but he did say that he has an approval rate of 98% in Israel. And he said, I might as well take a trip over to Israel to become the new Prime Minister. But the funny thing is, he is very much aware of what is going on and what is being said about him. Remember, not too long ago, when he gave this speech in front of the journalists, raising his hands, looking up to heaven, and said, I am the chosen one? In the previous update, we had an article by the Washington Post, dated November 1. And the article said this. On Tuesday, this was of course prior to November 1, Secretary of State Pompeo commemorated a moment more than 2,500 years ago. Today in 539 BC, Cyrus the Great entered Babylon and freed the Jewish people from captivity, Pompeo tweeted. Pompeo was referring to a rather famous event in history. According to sources including biblical scriptures, Cyrus allowed the Judeans deported and exiled following the ravages of Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II to return to their homeland. Like any other ancient warrior king, and that is what we should take great note of, he presided over massacres and pillage, including a notorious incident immortalized by the ancient Greek chronicler Herodotus, where Cyrus burned a vanquished foe and 14 young boys alive on a funeral pyre. But Cyrus is memorialized as an all-powerful emperor who still allowed for coexistence among different peoples, sects, and religions. The Cyrus cylinder casts Cyrus as an agent of the Babylonian god Marduk, which is just another name for Mithras, a Persian sun god. So he, from everything we know, was a pagan sun god worshipper. It goes on to say that some right-wing Christian evangelical supporters of the president have embraced the idea of a Trump prophecy, a glimmer of divine providence. Some evangelicals who support Zionism, out of the belief that the Jewish migration to Israel would trigger the second coming, have eagerly elevated Trump to the status of a biblical ruler. It goes on to say that Netanyahu has declared Trump to be one of a singular set of non-Jewish heroes in the long sweep of Jewish history, linking his deeds with those of the British Lord Balfour, President Truman, and yes, Cyrus the Great. Now, this article is not specifically referring to the building of the Third Temple, but taking everything together, it becomes very clear that that is what's being expected. The Third Temple is supposed to be built, and quite frankly, the feeling seems to be that Donald Trump will have something to do with that. I feel that too. He seems to be believing this as well. We recently pointed out that he even has asked some Jewish rabbis how long time he still has before Christ will return. Of course, he talked about the Messiah, to do what he feels needs to be done insofar as Israel is concerned. Now, these are very interesting facts. When we point out these facts, we have to be very certain that we don't miss misrepresent things or that we are not being misunderstood. We are just pointing out these facts from the standpoint that God throughout history has used certain individuals to fulfill certain parts of his plan. This has nothing to do with whether those people were righteous or not righteous. We are not making a comment on that because God has sometimes used people who were righteous to do and fulfill certain aspects of his plan, and some who were not righteous at all, but they were still used to fulfill certain aspects of his plan. And when we look at history, we can clearly state that Charlemagne, Otto the Great, Charles V, Napoleon Bonaparte, Hitler, Mussolini, were all being used to fulfill aspects of God's plan. Talking here now about the 10 revivals of the ancient Roman Empire and the coming beast and the coming false prophet. Now God knows who they are. We may not know it yet. They are being used to fulfill prophecies as being described, for instance, in the book of Revelation, in 2 Thessalonians, also in other Old Testament scriptures like Ezekiel. So I personally feel strongly, and I've said this time and again, that President Trump will be in charge until he has fulfilled his role, which I believe includes assisting in the building of the third temple, which needs to be happening. Now, there's still some who don't believe that. They don't believe that a third temple will have to be built. All the scriptures which talk about the temple allegedly refer to the church, which is rather strange, because then you would have the man of sin coming into the church of God, and proclaiming to be God. That's a far-fetched idea. No, it's going to be a third temple in Jerusalem. And when that temple is being built, chaos, turmoil will break out. I mean, can you imagine the Arabs, how they would react? Let's say if the Al-Aqsa Mosque is being dismantled, so that place is being created for the temple to be built, it will be total, complete chaos. And that's why the Europeans will come in militarily to, quote-unquote, stop that chaos. America will not come in militarily because they will be on the side of Israel, but the Europeans will attack America. So they will have no position. They can't even do it, even if they wanted to. Also, we should understand that there's going to come a time when Ephraim and Manasseh are against each other. In other words, the UK and the US. They will be on a hostile basis in the future. And they both are against Israel, as it says. So the friendly relationship will continue until the point has been reached where what needs to be done will be done, and then it will all change. So my advice would be to very carefully look at the events as they are taking place, but let's not make the mistake of ascribing any righteousness or unrighteousness to the people involved in this development. As we have just seen, Cyrus was used by God. Apparently, he was already known to God by name long before he was ever born. The book of Isaiah talks about him. But he was an idol worshiper. And there is really no indication that he ever changed. Nebuchadnezzar was an idol worshiper. Now, he might have changed after the 7 years when he became an animal, or living with the animals, I should say, when the spirit of man was taken away from him. It seems like then he humbled himself after that. So we'll have to wait and see what's going to happen. But my point is, let's watch what is happening in the United States, and also in relationship to Europe, in relationship to Israel. And let's also watch Europe. Europe is coming together in a way and with a speed which is really remarkable if you think about many, many years ago when the Berlin Wall fell, how long it took until we have reached the point now. But now we've reached the point. Now they're talking about European army, something which, for instance, Germany would never want to talk about before. Now, why is it then, coming back to the beginning of the speech today, that members seem to become disinterested in these fulfillments of prophecy? Something we have been talking about would happen for many, many years, didn't happen. Members left the church for whatever reason. There are going to be some perhaps even many, who will leave the church of God again. We're talking about the spiritual body of Jesus Christ, because a falling away is prophesied. It says in the Bible that many will be offended, many will hate each other, and the love of many will grow cold. And the love which is talked about there is agape, which is God's love. And you can only have God's love if you have God's Spirit. So we are seeing clearly a prophecy where people will walk away from God, from the truth, from the church of God, and perhaps even from the Holy Spirit. In other words, they might lose it. So that's a warning. And we should not take that lightly. We should keep watching, because we want to be those who are called worthy to be in the kingdom of God, to be in the first resurrection, and also to be spared from the terrible times to come. We have to be called worthy, and God will make that decision. Let's make sure that He makes a decision favorable to us.